Welcome to the Finance Magnates Blockchain Podcast. I'm Rachel McIntosh. The sweeping set of bans that China placed on cryptocurrency near the end of 2017 made waves around the world. While the crypto trading industry was effectively shut down in the country, the blockchain technology industry has continued to grow. Recently, Finance Magnates spoke with Desmond, managing director of The Floor, about the Chinese blockchain industry. Okay, so Desmond, can you just start by telling us who you are and what has your professional journey been like?
Right, it's quite an interesting journey, actually. My name is Desmond Marshall. I'm the managing director for The Floor in Asia, in charge of expanding into Asia Pacific. The Floor is actually a global fintech innovation center. Mm-hmm. We originate from Israel 2 years ago, close to 2 years ago. And one of the key things that we're doing right now is actually we are working and also serving our main clients first, the bank partners, names like HSBC, Santander, Intesa Sanpaolo, RBS, Deutsche Bank, CTBC, and a few numbers of new banks coming in around here. And what we do is actually we create the next fintech for these people. We scout outside globally in terms of looking for the next fintech, addressing existing challenges and also future challenges as well. So in a way, one of the key things that we are working on right now these days is what we call blockchain. Mm-hmm. Blockchain, of course, can span and cover a lot of different areas. But then again, in terms of fintech, that's definitely a very important category where blockchain is being applied to. And one of the key initiatives that The Floor is actually doing globally is that we're pushing an initiative called the Blockchain Factory. And what we do is actually we scout around for all the blockchain companies around the world, the good ones, of course, and then we see how we can help them in terms of pretty much everything from head to toe. So we're talking about if it's normally blockchain companies are fairly new. If we're talking about new technologies and everything, so in terms of the business side of things, they will probably need guidance and mentorship, and also in terms of management skills, experience in terms of how they work along developing the technology, not just developing the technology, but also working with other partners in terms of tech, and also in terms of can they effectively be applied to the commercial sense. That's in regards to how they talk to customers or how they talk to individual consumers. Whether or not they do ICOs or not, that's a different matter. But then again, at the end of the day, if a company is doing business, then of course they will need customers, clients around here. And also how it applies to a bigger market outside, not just globally, but also in Asia Pacific, and also to other industries as well. Of course, the main targets of what we're looking at is definitely in terms of the fintech industry or the fintech sector or financial sector. And this is something that we're looking at pushing. And of course, at the end of the day, people will be looking into investments as well, corporate ventures, VCs, individual investors investing into these blockchain companies and pushing them to the next level. So this is what we're doing in terms of, especially The Floor, in terms of what we're doing in terms of for blockchain.
I see. So can you give me a little bit, or I guess, are you at liberty to discuss some specific examples of these blockchain companies that The Floor is helping?
Well, some of them we can discuss, like Bancor. Bancor is one of the earlier blockchain companies outside. It's quite successful right now. And if you're definitely in the ICO world, you'll definitely heard about Bancor in terms of how they convert one cryptocurrency to another cryptocurrency with a third-party exchange in between. We help them in terms of developing and managing and also advising onto the ICO itself, and it became at that point of time, it was one of the highest grossing ICO companies in the world, and that's one of the things that we're doing, and we're also looking into other things as well. My journey, I worked in I've been looking into blockchain companies projects for more than 7 years already. Of course, much more earlier than a lot of people. Back then, blockchain was really, really very high tech and really, really new to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, it's quite difficult for the common people to actually understand, let alone apply to their markets or to the industry itself. Mm-hmm. But with what's happening for the past few years, many of these companies are turning around, not just banks, but also many of these private companies, commercial companies, are looking into applying blockchain into these areas. So in a way, my experience in terms of as an investor, I'm a VC myself. Mm-hmm. I've been looking into these blockchain companies, fintech companies for quite some time already. Of course, I've been investing into cryptocurrencies as well, working with other companies, and also advising on quite a significant number of ICOs outside with their experience around here. So that's the kind of experience that we try to bring over to the floor and to the blockchain factory, and also help out the companies in a more holistic way from head to toe, from actual development, getting the MVPs out to actual finding investors outside around the world.
Okay, so over the next 5 years, you've mentioned and banking and some other sectors, but what problems specifically do you think that the floor will help to address in helping these blockchain companies and partnering them with these, as you said, HSBC, Santander, RBS, Deutsche Bank. What services do you think that the floor will help develop specifically?
I think as a whole, one of the key strengths or key significant differences that we can bring to many of these blockchain companies is that we have our eyes and ears and our hearts actually together with the banks. So in a way, one of the key challenges outside right now are actually blockchain companies or the ICO or the cryptocurrencies cannot connect to the banks. Mm-hmm. So there are several reasons for that, and I can go on in a deeper meaning later on. But then again, one of the key things that what we're looking at right now is, of course, everyone's talking about decentralization and everything using blockchain. But then again, some of the challenges is definitely lies within the how they connect with the banks, how they connect to traditional financial systems itself. Mm-hmm. Because yes, there are companies that will say, "Hey, I don't need banks. I don't need the traditional financial institutes, the FIs around here. I can do things myself." Mm-hmm. Sure. But then again, you're only limited to as much to just a small group of people, because eventually, say for example, you are transferring money, you can transfer some money in a small amounts, but then again, with larger amounts of fiat currencies, it's going to be very difficult without any traditional forms of institutions in between. And also, it's not about how we sort of like disrupt the environment or disrupt the industry. My suggestion normally to these blockchain companies is, let's see how we can work together on this area. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the key things that most blockchain companies do not understand, or we're not just looking into blockchain companies as well, but on an overall fintech startups or in this kind of new age kind of companies outside, is that many of them don't really look into how customers are looking at first. They will think about, okay, let's build up something that I think the customers needs. But then once they did everything outside, the customers are saying, hey, I really don't need this. I need something else. So in a way, it's a mismatch mm-hmm. in terms of many of the actual applications of the blockchain or to the fintech companies outside. Now, one of the key things that we're bringing to the floor or to the companies outside is we actually have the connections and also the know-how and also how the regulators and compliance is working with the banks. So in a way, we do have one of the key priorities is in terms of, okay, if these companies eventually they will need to work in compliance with the banks. Now, whether they're doing ICOs or not an ICO, or they're just doing a blockchain company, they will have to work with the banks outside. Mm-hmm. Then how do they actually connect to the banks early on? That's one of the key things that we're bringing it over. And of course, with our experience outside, we also understand what actually works and what actually do not work in terms of the consumer fields outside, especially with Asia moving along around here. Asia's a very strong contender in terms of consumer-facing user experience. And in this sense, many of the customers that we know is we know that how they are thinking, we know how they are actually doing things themselves. Because at the end of the day, blockchain, people are talking about let's do away with third parties, let's do it directly. So you're not talking to commercial companies anymore, mid-person third parties anymore. You might be looking into, hey, let's directly connect to someone who wants to buy a can of soda pop with me. So how do these customers think if you are trying to sell them a can of soda pop to them? And will they be willing to trust you and pay you, whether they're using Bitcoins or Ether or just normal fiat currency, to using your blockchain and make that purchase themselves? So that's the kind of experience that I see today. Many blockchain companies or new age companies, they still lack in terms of this kind of experience, and also the mentality and the understanding of the psychology of how these individual consumers are thinking about. Most people don't think about this because it can be quite nightmarish. Because if you think of this as if you're talking to just one commercial company, one big supplier, you're just talking to one person or just a small amount of people making the decisions. But if you're talking to individual consumers, then if you have, say, for example, 1,000 consumers or clients, then you have 1,000 different sets of requirements coming in. So do you change your blockchain, or do you change your operations accordingly to just one person saying, I don't like your blockchain, I need you to change something for me? Or do you look into something a lot more broader, where you're thinking about your customers, your customers as a whole, what kind of things you need to change for your blockchain or for your technology behind it? So yes, that's the kind of business mentality, the entrepreneurship mentality that we bring to that we add on to the value as well. Because the founders are very experienced entrepreneurs. They're very experienced fintech practitioners and also business people as well. So these are kind of value that we actually bring to these blockchain companies.
I see. So Desmond, you are a member of the Ethereum Enterprise Alliance, is that correct?
Right.
Yes. So from your perspective, both as this person who's been very successful in the blockchain industry and involved for the past 7 years, and as a member of the Ethereum Enterprise Alliance, can you speak a little bit to where Ethereum is headed over the next year or several years in terms of technology, as well as what role you think that Ethereum is evolving to play on a global scale?
Sure. Ether or Ethereum actually is quite active and advanced in terms of how they are moving forward. Most people may not be aware of this, but probably some of the people in the blockchain community or the tech people, they will understand that where Ethereum is actually heading. So we talk about the backbone of it actually is related to one of the challenges that the banks are facing these days as well. It relates to zero knowledge. So for those who don't know what zero knowledge is basically, if you think about blockchain, people are talking about, okay, I'm opening things up. I will share information to people. But then again, there are some information that you do not want to share with other people. So say, for example, as a bank, the bank will have your information, your personal details, where you work, where you live, how much tax you're actually paying, etc., etc. These are very personal details. But if you're saying, hey, because I'm a blockchain company, I'm connecting to the banks, and the banks will have to release your personal details out to other companies, as a consumer or as an individual, I don't think that you will agree to that. And the banks will not agree to that as well, because the banks have spent a lot of money and resources and time in gathering that information, protecting your information. And you can't just have another blockchain company coming in and say, okay, I'm a blockchain company, I need your customers' information, give it to me. That's pretty much impossible. And so that's one of the key areas where we're seeing blockchain companies today cannot connect to the banks itself. And one of the key things that we're looking into is basically the KYC compliance and regulations. So this is related to that. And what we're talking about these days in terms of the new tech and in terms of new directions is about zero knowledge. So zero knowledge is about, it relates to cryptography. It's about how we tell people, other people, third parties, that we have something by not telling them that we have this. So it's quite paradoxical if you think of this, but it's pretty much that's where we're heading it right now. Now, Ether and some of the people outside, they're using that, figuring out and also investigating, developing new technology related to that. So if you're hearing things like ZK snarks, these are the things that we are talking about in terms of zero blockchain technology. So Ether just had a new update in terms of Byzantium that also relates to preparing for what's coming down the road in terms of zero knowledge as well. Now, we talked about, and also in terms of something like how Ether is going to change from proof of work concept to proof of stake concept. So that exactly is preparing the road for zero knowledge. Because right now at this day around here, when the real application of blockchain is still very limited, I'm still seeing a lot of limitations in terms of actual application out in the outside world. There are instances where we're just seeing banks rolling out real applications for the actual clients or for the actual customers. So there's one actually that involves in commercial trading. So but if you think about this, banks have been investigating and researching for blockchain for at least 3 to 5 years already. So one of the things that we're looking at right now is, okay, we have enough funding, and many outside companies as well, they have the ICO or they have new investors coming in. So right now it's really pedal to the metal for what we're saying is that, right, you got the money already, now is the time to actually develop a blockchain and have people actually work on the blockchain according to what you're thinking. And actually we're seeing that a lot of blockchain companies with the original intent of, okay, I need to share information now, and et cetera, they're getting pushed back because the information supposedly in an ideal world is supposed to be shared. But then again, the real information cannot be shared because of personal privacy and personal details as well. So in a way, the blockchain companies are facing quite a dilemma in terms of, yes, I built everything according to a sharing economy, but then again, the actual customers are not willing to share because of personal privacy. Even themselves, they're seeing it quite difficult as well. So they need to actually develop to the next stage of what we call the zero blockchain, zero knowledge, is that we're going to share something out and prove that we have this information by not telling you that information as a whole. So what Ether or Ethereum is doing right now these days is actually preparing for the road moving down ahead for this proof of stake concept. So I don't want to go into proof of work and proof of stake concept differences, but one of the main challenges right now with proof of work is basically what Bitcoin is facing. It's expensive, it takes a long time, and suddenly when CryptoKitties comes along, it will actually like block the entire blockchain. Yeah. So and that's a real world situation, and that's how some of the blockchains, the major blockchains, are still surviving, but they're experiencing these delays, these lagging behind, expensive in terms of electricity and everything. So they're seeing real world applications and real world challenges around here, which are affecting blockchain. So the good thing about Ether right now is that they are actually based upon the real world challenges, the things that they've experienced already that they're moving forward in a different way. I'm not saying in a different way, but it's more like to make sure that we don't go through that hole again, because you never know, tomorrow might be another crypto doggies or crypto rabbits coming along here, which will again paralyze the entire network, and that will be detrimental. Yeah. Because as you can see outside in the blockchain community, a lot of the ICOs or a lot of these blockchain companies are based upon Ethereum. Mm-hmm. And if something is actually blocking along here, then a majority of the blockchain companies will be delayed as well. So we are actually, but then again, this is not just a technical problem in terms of zero knowledge. The cryptography, the cryptographic nature of how we want to share things, but we don't want to share everything out, and we can't tell everything out to other people. And also in terms of how the community and also the environment accepts the crypto world and also the blockchain world as well.
So can you speak a little bit more about, as Ethereum is becoming the backbone of so many different dApps and other blockchains and blockchain services in the fintech industry, has the leadership in the alliance, the Ethereum Enterprise Alliance, changed at all? Or are there any upcoming changes? And are there any changes in kind of the mission of the Ethereum Enterprise Alliance?
I can't speak much for the alliance itself, but what I can speak is it's actually a conglomerate of different industry experts inside. Mm. So there are different silos or verticals in terms of how each people are actually looking after in different industries. So in a way, I would think that if I'm seeing Ethereum as a whole, not just talking about the alliance, but Ethereum as a whole, mm-hmm. in comparison with other blockchains outside, Ethereum is definitely still one of the major blockchains that people or the companies are still working on. Mm-hmm. But they are not the only ones. There are different companies that are developing their own blockchains. IBM and Microsoft have their own blockchains moving along, and I'm sure that as the technology grows, as more and more businesses are looking into using blockchain technology in their own operations, and also how the general public is looking into blockchain and cryptocurrencies, there will be more and more companies developing their own blockchains. So in a way, as I mentioned to a lot of people outside and advise in a lot of companies outside as well, one of the key things is not about how technically advanced your blockchain is. Of course, that will have an impact in terms of what you're doing. But more importantly is how do you actually get a group of like-minded people trusting you, believing in you, and actually using your blockchain. Mm-hmm. Because at the essence of blockchain is about decentralizing and trusting. And many people forget the actual concept. There's only one key word in terms of blockchain is what we call consensus. That's the real key word in terms of blockchain technology. So in a way, the consensus don't just go into the technology itself, how you get a consensus within the technical aspects of it, but also a consensus of the people using the blockchain. Because if you're just putting it in a very layman's term, it's like people using the same database or the information highway. If you're not on this highway, then I'm not interested, or I won't get that information. Mm-hmm. So you have to be on the same highway in order to actually get that information or share that information out. So it's like, hey, you can build your own database. I can build my own database. But if no one's using it, then it's a useless database. Yeah. Same as with blockchain as well. So one of the key things that normally I advise to companies, or I would suggest to normal companies like blockchain companies, is it's really not solely about the technology, but also in terms of can you get people to believe in you and actually paying you to actually use your blockchain. Mm-hmm. So it goes really deep down, and also very simply business operations and good business sense. So in a way, I'm saying yes, there's a lot of technology moving along, and frankly speaking, I don't think that anyone can actually keep up with what's happening technologically. So it really is a very big world out there, and everyone's doing their own thing. And you can see every day and every minute, every second, new technology surrounding blockchain is coming up. And of course, we're not just talking about technology. There's new policies coming along. There's new legislation. There's new people in the news talking about how they think about cryptocurrencies, blockchains, how new companies are trying to adapt that, et cetera, et cetera. So there's too much news or too much information outside. Whereas at the end of the day, if a blockchain company wants investors coming in, or they want a healthy company, a legitimate, healthy company that can sustain for a longer term period, finding the business sense and also the right customers to use the blockchain is quite essential.
Right. And speaking of these legislation and regulations, you mentioned earlier that the floor is based in both Israel and in Hong Kong. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Hong Kong, we're looking after Asia Pacific. So it's not just the legislation or the policies around in Hong Kong, but also pretty much from any country in Asia Pacific.
Right. Well, so as a person who's based in Hong Kong, do you believe that China will reverse any of the bans that it has placed on the crypto industry? And if you do think that, then when will that happen?
The situation with China is quite a little bit sensitive at this point around here. Now, one of the key things that the People's Bank of China just announced recently, just these past 2 weeks, is that they have been developing or they have been researching in terms of blockchain for quite some time already. And in terms of talking about the blockchain technology, China is quite open and welcomes this kind of discussion as well. But of course, if we're talking about like cryptocurrencies or ICOs, that's a definite no-no. So any blockchain companies that are thinking of doing certain things like this in China, I would strongly suggest them do not, because it is by law illegal. But then mainly because the People's Bank of China has already announced outside that they have an initiative called the DCEP. It's called Digital Currency Electronic Payments. So this is an initiative that relates to blockchain, digital currency themselves, and also how it's being used. Now, the key word around here is how it's being used. So it says very clearly that digital currency, of course, is the cryptocurrency behind blockchain, and also the digital currency, the official digital currency. But also in terms of the application of it, they're talking about electronic payments. So we're talking about like consumer payments, buying a can of soda, paying rent, or doing, or just buying commodities or a handbag, etc., etc. And it specifically did not talk about trading, like crypto exchange trading, cryptocurrencies exchanges, not in terms of speculations as well. So the state of China has specifically mentioned this. The People's Bank of China, of course, it's representing the state. It's quite clear cut in terms of how it mentions, okay, yeah, we're developing the digital currency, but for a very specific purpose. So in terms of ICOs, that does not fall into electronic payments. It falls into trading. So it's a definite no-no, and I would not expect this ban to be lifted soon. Okay. Because definitely it's something that the state itself is of concern in terms of how they're seeing people transferring money in and out freely, without there's money laundering involved as well. So which means that there's a lot of anti-corruption processes that needs to be considered as well. So in a way, in terms of funding mechanisms, I would strongly suggest if a blockchain company requires funding, they should actually think in terms of traditional VC investing or PE investing.
Okay. As you mentioned, you said that the Chinese government is still, although cryptocurrency is a no-no, that blockchain technology is still something that they're open to at least discuss. So can you speak a little bit more about what kinds of blockchain firms and companies are popping up in China? If there are any besides the floor.
Well, there are a lot, actually. For the past year, 6 months to the past year, China had quite a big boom in terms of the fintech sector, in terms of and also the new age entrepreneurship startup sector, where people are just looking very strongly into blockchain technology. Mm-hmm. So of course the fad or the push or the popularity of Bitcoin outside helped in terms of people understanding what blockchain is. But in terms of the technology, China is actually very welcoming in terms of how these things are being applied. So in terms of the governments, from the government itself to the local provinces, down to commercial companies, new startup companies, they are looking, pretty much anything that you can think of, mm-hmm. They are already thinking about developing or actually in progress of developing blockchain technology to be applied into those areas. Wow. So I'm seeing quite a number in terms of, especially in terms of supply chains, in terms of fintech finance as well, in terms of people tracking parcels, quite commercial things, and also there are commercial companies that revolves around retail as well, consumer retail as well. They are already thinking about blockchain companies. So I've seen investments, quite large investments, even from like consumer retail, that they're investing into quite a large sum of money in terms of blockchain technology, how they can be applied. Of course, the application itself, it's still very premature at this point around here. Mm-hmm. But they are rolling things out, testing internally. So pretty much anything that you can think of, from a factory down to a consumer retail, they are already thinking about how they apply this blockchain technology over to it. Of course, they will need some time in terms of actual developing and actual putting it into the actual practice itself. Mm-hmm. But many of the BATs, the Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, they've already done a lot of investments. They are looking into these areas, and they are also already testing it around the way. We are looking into how we work much more closely in China as well, in terms of connecting different blockchain companies with the commercial companies, not just that, and also to investors as well. Mm-hmm. Investors, we're talking about like large investors, institutional investors, down to individual investors or corporate ventures, and also connecting, much more importantly, connecting to commercial companies that can actually, or commercial individuals that will actually use this blockchain. Because like I said initially, it's having investment funds, of course, helps in terms of how to keep the company financially healthy. But most important of all, you need customers. The blockchain needs someone to actually use it. Mm-hmm. So in a way, how these individual consumers are using this particular blockchain technology, or a company or a chain of companies or a chain of commercial retail or financial institutions are using these blockchain technologies to serve their own customers, that's much more important from my end of point. Will be just as important from my point of view. So these are certain things that we are actually trying to connect and see how we can actually group up together with different people and having a better ecosystem for external blockchain companies outside the world to actually see how they can be applied within China.
All right. Well, Desmond, that's actually all the questions that I have for right now. Is there anything else that you'd like to add before we close this interview?
I think it's just an advice and also some suggestions to anyone here who's listening onto this and thinking about, okay, should I develop my own blockchain company, or how do I look into cryptocurrencies, and et cetera, et cetera. it is a good time in terms of looking and actually looking at applying blockchain technologies into your own companies or actually doing business with this technology. It's just a matter of course, each nature will be a little bit different. But then again, blockchain, I don't see blockchain will go away soon. Because a lot of companies, banks, and also bigger institutions have already invested in a lot in terms of researching and also doing proof of concepts in blockchain technology. So I would think that for any entrepreneurs or new companies, young companies that are thinking about, okay, should I do this or not? I would suggest you strongly to look into this. Of course, if you're doing like normal retail or whatever, that may not be a priority. But then again, this new technology will hit normal consumer retail to normal individuals very soon as well. Because there's, like I said, there's been a lot of research and conceptual work being developed behind for myself. I've been reviewing these types of projects for more than 7 years, sorry. And for the latest, I'm seeing banks have been doing research for 3 to 5 years already. So right now, what we're seeing for the next 1 or 2 years, I will see that there will be an explosion of new companies suddenly popping up and say, okay, we are a blockchain company and we have the MVPs or the technology behind, which is ready for people to actually use it. So you'll suddenly be faced with a group of or a bunch of new companies, which may be your new competitors in future. And you have no idea that they exist right now. So I would strongly suggest, just for the sake of business itself, that that you take a look not just into the blockchain technology, but what these companies are doing using these blockchain technologies in their own environment, because sooner or later they will become your competitor or your alliance, of course. But then again, it's something that I have forewarned a lot of even listed companies to be very careful, because you might be thinking about, okay, I'm a car company, I will just be thinking about other car companies. But suddenly there will be new companies coming out and say, hey, I'm a blockchain technology which provides systems inside a car where people can actually connect inside a car and actually do transactions, etc., and track my car using blockchain technology. And suddenly these companies that may not be a car company, well, some of them can be a car company as well. I'm seeing also blockchain companies are trying to raise funds in terms of doing property development as well. So suddenly these companies will have few things. Number one, they suddenly may have enough funding, a lot of funding, especially if they've done successful ICOs outside. And two, because of this funding, the ICO funding or fundraising outside, they have a lot of individual blockchain supporters who's going to use this blockchain technology. And suddenly they have a lot of customers following them. So these two factors will actually challenge existing traditional companies outside, which have no idea of, okay, these are the kind of competitors that are actually secretly doing things behind their back. And once they're going out, it's pretty much like I'm pretty strong already in terms of facing up the challenge.
All right.
So in a way, I would just have to say that it's an exciting time. It's definitely a time where don't wait to really look into blockchain, and it will have a lot more applications coming along the way. And if you're building a new technology, always using good business sense to look into your competitors, and especially look into your intended audience. Are they willing to support your blockchain operations? So if they're willing to do so, then at the very least, then you have a good base, a customer base where they will support you and help you build up further on in terms of the company itself.
All right. Fantastic advice. Desmond, thank you so much for your time. It's been such a pleasure to speak with you. Yes.
My pleasure too.
And enjoy your weekend.
You too. Thank you.
We'll be in touch. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.